A shape with coal-black eyes and a smile that didn't belong to any human face. It came close and I went silent. Not from fear, but because it pressed into me. A cold that stole my voice and left a name burned under my skin. I should have died that night, but a priest found me, spoke words I didn't understand, and pulled whatever had its fingers on me back into the white. I'm alive because he wouldn't let the silence finish me. And now, every time I say a missing person's name, something answers.
You are listening to Studio Haunt. The only frequency that never sleeps. Open FM. We see you listening. Do you hear the static?
That's not static. That's us. Please, turn off the radio.
It's coming through the speakers.
Studio Haunt. The broadcast is inside you now.
This is not a polished tale. It is the record of what happened to me. The small, ordinary choices that led me into a place that did not want to be remembered, the nights that followed, and the way the world rearranged itself afterward. I tell it plainly because the thing that touched me fed on drama and on the distance people put between themselves and the real, slow terror of losing someone and not being able to prove it. I went into the park because I needed to be alone with a camera. I had been taking pictures for years, landscapes mostly, the kind of work that pays in small commissions and the occasional print sale. That morning the sky was a flat, hard gray. The road in was quiet. The town still smelled of last night's coffee. I packed the usual thermals, a thermos, a spare battery, a notebook. I told myself I was going for a walk and some photographs. I told myself a lot of things that day. The trail was a ribbon of untouched snow. For the first hour, it was exactly what I wanted. Clean light, the kind of silence that makes you notice small things. The way a branch holds a bead of ice. The way a breath fogs and then disappears. Then I saw the prints. They were a single line of boot marks, evenly spaced, heading into the trees. They stopped in a small clearing. Not at a drop-off, not at a boulder, not at anything that made sense. The last print was as clear as the first, then nothing. No drag marks, no scuffs, no sign that someone had fallen or been dragged. The snow around it was smooth, like someone had smoothed it with a hand. I stood there for a long time. My camera hung useless at my chest. I called out because that's what you do when you find something that doesn't fit. My voice came back at me thin and small. I waited. Nothing answered. The only sound was the slow settling of snow. I should have left. I didn't. I followed the prints a little farther because curiosity is a kind of obligation when you're alone in the woods. The trail led to a stand of pines and then dissolved into a tangle of small trees. I found a glove, half buried, the kind you buy at a hardware store. It was damp and smelled faintly of coffee. There was no other gear. No pack. No sign of a person. I took photographs. I wrote notes. I left a marker on a tree and walked back to the road. I told myself I would report it, that I would be practical. I told myself I would not let the image of that last print become a story in my head. The ranger station was small and efficient. The woman behind the counter smiled the way people do when they are trained to be calm. I told her what I'd found. She took notes, asked the usual questions. Time, location, description. She said they would check the trail and log the incident. Later, over coffee at the diner, I realized how little that meant. The town had a different language for absence. Faces taped to telephone poles. Laminated photos in plastic sleeves. names written in marker and left to fade. People who had been waiting for months. When I asked for case numbers, the answers were polite and thin. Privacy, they said. Ongoing investigations. When I asked for records, the file drawer was full of forms that didn't match the faces on the polls. People told me things in the way people tell things when they don't want to be believed. A search team that turned away from a ravine. A report that failed to upload. A deputy who said he'd been in the field for hours but whose log showed nothing. I started to collect names. Not because I thought I could solve anything, but because I was afraid the town would smooth them away if I didn't. I wrote them in a small notebook and kept it in my jacket. I learned to say them aloud when the nights were bad. There were explanations offered: hypothermia, disorientation, animals. Those are real causes. They leave traces. They leave bodies. What I kept running into was absence that looked deliberate. Files that had been closed with a sentence, footage that failed at the worst possible moment, search logs that had gaps. It felt like a bureaucracy that could be polite and empty at the same time. I rented a small cabin on the edge of the park because I wanted to see, to document, to be useful in a way that didn't involve waiting for someone else to act. The cabin was basic. A wood stove, a small table, a bed that creaked. It was the kind of place that smells like old wood and lemon oil. I told myself I would stay a week and then go home. The first nights were ordinary in the way ordinary things can be. The moon making the snow look like a second sky, the way shadows pooled between trunks. Then the sounds began. At first it was small things, a noise like someone walking on the roof, a distant laugh that could have been a fox. Then I started waking with a pressure on my chest. It felt like someone leaning on me, not heavy enough to crush, but heavy enough to make breathing difficult. My limbs would feel sluggish, as if the cold had seeped into my bones. Once, I woke to the sensation of a fingertip of ice pressing against my forehead. I could not move. I could not speak. I could only listen. There were voices, too. Not words at first, just syllables carried on the wind. Sometimes they sounded like names. Once, I heard my own name, clear as a bell. I called out and my voice sounded small and ridiculous in the dark. When morning came, I would find myself on the floor by the door, boots still on, jacket zipped. My phone would be dead. My watch would have stopped at the same time, 2:13 a.m. I left the cabin after 3 nights. I drove with the heater on full blast, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I told myself I was being sensible. I told myself I would not let the place get under my skin. Back in the city, the changes were small at first. A light that flickered when I entered a room. A photograph that developed with a smear across a face. A voicemail that played back as static. People began to avoid me. A woman in a grocery store dropped her basket and ran when she saw me. Rumors spread. I lost a job because a client said I seemed distracted. The presence, that's the only word that fits, did not always attack in obvious ways. It worked in the small, corrosive ways. It made me forget appointments, then names, then entire afternoons. It made me doubt my memory until I began to suspect that perhaps I had imagined the footprints in the snow, the figure at the tree lane, the pressure on my chest. But memory is stubborn. I kept the notebook. I kept the names. I read them aloud sometimes because saying a name felt like an act of resistance. The presence noticed. It learned my rhythms. It learned the names of the people I loved and whispered them to me at night, not to comfort but to claim. Once, in the middle of a crowded subway, the air around me went still and I heard my name spoken in a voice that was not human.
I see you.
People glanced at me and then away. No one else seemed to hear it. That is the thing about this kind of terror. It isolates you. It makes you the only person who remembers. I started a ledger, not because I thought it would stop anything, but because I needed a record that was not subject to the town's polite erasures. I wrote names, dates, places. I wrote down the times my watch stopped. I wrote down the smell of the snow in the clearing, the copper tang that made my stomach turn. I wrote down the way the light looked when the presence was near. A thin, hard light that made shadows sharp and faces flat. People began to come to me. Not many, but enough. A woman whose brother had disappeared 10 years earlier and whose name had never made it into a file. A man who had found a boot half buried in a drift and had been told it was animal. A volunteer who had been on a search team and had been told to sign a form and go home. They wanted someone to listen. They wanted someone to say their names and make them real. We met in the back room of the diner. We read names aloud. We compared notes. We mapped the places where footprints ended and where search teams had turned away. We found patterns. Ridgelines where dogs refused to go, cabins where radios died, times when watches stopped. The presence noticed us, tested us. It whispered names none of us had written down. It made the lights flicker when someone said a particular town. We learned to answer with names. We learned to speak louder. It offered me a bargain once. Not in words, but in a vision. A life where the ledger was empty and the town was peaceful. It showed me the small comforts I had lost. A steady job, friends who didn't look away, a morning where the coffee tasted right, promised sleep, promised the return of ordinary things. I thought about it. I thought about the nights I had spent awake, the friends I had lost, the job that had slipped away. For a moment I almost accepted. Then I thought of the faces on the poles. I thought of the old man who drove the same route every Sunday. I thought of the volunteer who had vomited in the snow. I thought of the ledger in my pocket. I refused. Refusal had a cost. The presence escalated. It began to take in ways that were quieter and more final. A woman who had been part of our meetings disappeared from her home in the night. Her husband woke to find the bed cold and the window open. The police wrote the usual report. No evidence of forced entry. No foul play suspected. The file was closed. The old man's car was found abandoned on a ridge, engine warm. There was no sign of him. The volunteer's dog was found days later, its fur matted and its eyes dull. The teenager who had filmed the clearing deleted the footage and swore he had never seen anything. I was unraveling when Father Mateo found me. He was not the theatrical figure I had imagined. He smelled of coffee and old books. His hands were rough from work in the community garden. He listened without interrupting as I told him everything. The footprints, the voices, the figure at the treeline, the nights I couldn't breathe. He did not call it a demon at first. He called it a presence that clung to memory and to places where people had been forgotten. He said names were anchors. He said ritual gave shape to fear. He did not promise miracles. He promised persistence. The first time he came to my apartment, he brought a small wooden box, a bottle of oil, and a book with pages that smelled of dust. He asked me to tell him the names I had collected. He wrote them down one by one and read them aloud. When he spoke their names, he did it like someone calling roll, with the authority of someone who refuses to let a name be erased. That night he stayed until dawn. He sprinkled oil in the corners, burned sage, and made me hold a small crucifix while he prayed. He told me the presence would test me, that it would try to make me doubt my senses and my sanity. He told me to answer it with names, with memory, with the insistence that people had existed and mattered. We planned a ritual that was practical and small. Candles, salt, names. No theatrics. We met in my living room. Father Mateo, 2 men from the parish, the retired investigator, the volunteer, and me. We set candles in a circle, placed a bowl of salt at the threshold, and opened the ledger. We read names. We read until our throats were raw. The presence came like a pressure in the air. It offered visions, faces smiling and then twisting, promises of secrets if we would stop naming them. It tried to bargain, tried to make us forget. Father Mateo did not bargain. He read prayers and names. The men chanted. The air grew colder. The candles guttered and flared. For a moment the lights went out. When they came back, the circle of salt was intact. It pressed against me one last time, a cold that wanted to root me to the floor. I answered with a name, not mine but one of the missing, and the pressure broke like glass. The room exhaled. The candles steadied. The men collapsed into chairs, shaking. It did not vanish. It retreated. It learned. But the hold it had on me was broken enough that I could sleep without waking at 2:13 a.m. every night. The months after the ritual were not a tidy recovery. The presence had been pushed back, not destroyed. It learned to wait. It learned to watch for cracks. It learned to be patient. We kept meeting. We kept the ledger. New names were added. New patterns emerged. The town continued to have its polite silences. Files still had gaps. Cameras still failed at the worst moments. But there were also small victories. A family found a ring in a drift that matched a missing woman's description. A volunteer found a scarf that had been reported missing years earlier. Those things did not undo the losses, but they mattered. I still wake sometimes at 2:13 a.m., heart pounding, and check the locks. I still carry the ledger. I still say names aloud when the nights are bad. Saying them is not a ritual that guarantees safety. It is a refusal to let the world smooth them away. This is not a story about monsters in the cinematic sense. It is about how absence can be organized, how systems can fail, and how forgetting can become a kind of violence. The presence, whatever it was, fed on gaps. Gaps in records, gaps in attention, gaps in memory. It used ordinary failures and turned them into a geography where people could be taken and then not counted. If there is a practical lesson here, it is this: names matter. Records matter. Small acts of attention matter. If you find a line of footprints that stop in the middle of nowhere, take a photograph. Write down a name. Tell someone. Keep a ledger. Insist that the missing be counted. I do not know whether the thing that touched me was a devil, a ghost, or something older and less named. I only know that it liked silence and that it fed on forgetting. I only know that once it touched me, my life was never the same, and that a priest with coffee on his breath and a book of names helped me pull myself back from the edge. If you ever hear a voice in the wind that sounds like your name, answer with someone else's. Give it a name to chew on that is not yours.